Welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swale. Today, I'm joined with Representative Mihaela Plesa of Texas House District 70, which includes parts of Dallas, Richardson, Plano, and Allen, Texas. Representative Plesa, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Brad?
I'm doing wonderful. It's a pleasure to speak with you. I'm glad that we got to do this. It's always fun to talk to people like you, people that are, they're out there doing their thing, trying to make a difference, make things better for Texas and for your community. So it's a real pleasure. Thank you so much. So I just gave a brief intro about what you do, but that's not who you are. So can you tell us who you are?
Yeah, I would love to. And thank you so much for having me on and for wanting to know more about Collin County and House District 70. So, a little bit about me. I am the first generation daughter of immigrant parents. My parents immigrated here from Eastern Europe, from Romania in the 1970s. I was born here in Texas, really close to my district at Medical City in Dallas. Grew up in my district in Plano. Went to schools in Plano ISD, and when I graduated with my master's, started my first business right here in House District 70. So I haven't ventured very far, but kind of being the daughter of immigrants, kind of politics and democracy and what it means to be an American had always kind of been instilled in me.
Sure.
And so when I kind of saw that our state was veering in a different direction than what I knew it to be, being a native Texan, I decided to run for office. I actually worked in the legislature for 6 years before deciding to run for office. I was a legislative staffer working for amazing members out of Dallas County and Harris County and Bexar County. And so in 2022, a new district was drawn in Collin County, and it just happened to be the most competitive seat of that cycle. It also happened to be the most expensive seat of that cycle. $4 million my opponent put into the race. But, we showed that these districts can't be bought, that it's really got to be about policy and what you're running on and what you're willing to do for your community. So I'm just really, really proud to be able to serve in this capacity and tell you more about how we get Democrats elected in Texas and the things that we're focused on, the kitchen table issues that we want to pass for our constituents.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely want to talk about all that. And just, I guess, for reference so people know, so you're the House District 70, I think I think it was recently redrawn, right? And you might be the first Democrat in a while that's been elected there. Is that correct?
Yeah, so my district was redrawn. It is Southwest Collin County, far north Dallas, Richardson, Allen, Plano. But I'm the first Democrat to represent Collin County in the state house in 30 years. Wow. I'm the first female Democrat to ever represent Collin County in the Texas House. And I'm the first Romanian American elected to anything in Texas. So we're making history out here in North Texas. But what I've been kind of telling people is I might be the first, but I'm definitely not the last. And it's really not about, I would say, party. I have a lot of amazing colleagues on city council, on school board, who are not partisan, but yet we have the same principles. We fight for the same policies, public education, healthcare, kids. And so I think that those kind of issues are the real core issues of democracy, and not so much are you playing for the red team or the blue team.
Yeah. I want to ask you briefly, just because I think it's a really interesting part of your story is, your family, you said that they immigrated from, I guess, Soviet Romania. Is that correct?
Yes, Eastern Europe, Soviet bloc.
Yeah, so they I guess they were, that was a communist area at the time, and a lot of times when people, they go from the communist, Soviet era style, they come to the United States, it really instills in they try to instill in their children like certain ideals and everything like that. It sounds like that happened with you as well. I'm curious, sort of how the lessons you were taught as a child from your parents and how that might inform your politics of today, how you make decisions at the ledge and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting because growing up, I was told these horror stories of why my grandparents left Romania. Ceausescu and communism was banning abortion, right? Women who had already had children who might be having complications with their pregnancies were forced into horrible conditions, horrible medical practices. And so, a lot of people here in America might remember the orphanage crisis that was happening in Romania in the 90s. And those were the stories that I grew up on. Those are the things that I had heard about. But also just censorship, the way that the Communist Party was banning books, the way that they were putting a hold on education. Also, kind of the way that they were running the healthcare systems, very, very lack of resources for people. And even to the point where, in when my grandparents and parents were growing up, there was a lack of electricity, right? The
Yeah.
government would shut off the power for a couple of hours. And so I see these similarities, right, with kind of American, or not American life, but Texas life right now. We're hearing women who are having to go into litigation with the state to get access to healthcare. We're hearing about women who have to leave the state to get access to healthcare. We can't keep the lights on. Anytime there's a bad storm or a hurricane, we're hearing about hundreds or thousands or even millions of people who lack power. That's critical. Those are things that the government should be number one top priorities: is keeping the lights on, keeping the water clean, keeping the roads functioning. And so I think that we've kind of moved away from that. And Texas, we're the eighth largest economy in the world. We should not have issues when we're talking about making sure kids have access to healthcare, or have access to lunch, even, or summer school food, right? Or summer uh, food programs. So
Yeah.
these are kind of the things that I kind of grew up hearing. And so when I see that our state is moving into what reminds me of the reasons my grandparents left Eastern Europe, then, I'm like, oh, we shouldn't be doing this. I've heard this story before. I've seen this movie before, right? And so those are kind of the driving factors for me
Yeah.
in my policy.
Yeah, I know a lot of your focus is on healthcare and women's reproduction and everything like that. I think even your first bill that you filed, if I'm not mistaken, was about health literacy. Um, and I think that health literacy is probably something that would help a lot of people sort of go about their daily lives, right? If they knew what all of this meant when they go to the hospital, or they get a bill, or they're talking with insurance. And that's a struggle, I think, for a lot of people. Why is health literacy, why was that your first bill?
Well, I think for me, well, I just want to
Please.
be straightforward that a lot of times it's what bills, you put these bills in draft, you work with your stakeholders, your ledge councils, and they
Yeah,
kind of send these bills back. And so I think that was one of the first bills that we actually had a draft for. And so it
sure.
just so happened to be the first bill that I filed. But the reason why that happened to be one of the first bills that I put into draft and started working on with stakeholders, it was because when I was knocking doors in my community, it was besides education, the number one thing that we were talking about on the doors with people: access to how to even navigate their insurance programs, how to navigate Medicaid, how to navigate Medicare, what the access to that looks like in Texas. Texas constantly is seeing an influx of people moving in our state from other states: Florida, California, Illinois, right, all over the place. And what they're oftentimes finding out is there's a reason why we say Texas is the least insured state in the nation, right?
Mhm.
That it looks different in Texas than it does in, let's just say, Vermont.
Okay.
And when they come here and they realize, oh my God, this isn't covered, or these things are different, or I have to go through these, hoops, or jump through these, loopholes and things like that to get care, there's an educational factor there, right? But also for the people that are native Texans, they also need to understand why it's important for them to have prenatal care, preventative care, why it's important for us to continue with our dental care, why it's important for us to get our eyes checked out, our ears checked out, neurological systems. And so all these things within themselves is more than just I took a biology class in school, right? It's very important. And if we don't have a healthy society, then you see the repercussions in that in education. You see repercussions of that in the workforce. You see repercussions in that in higher education and who can afford to go to college or go to a trade school, go to a community college. Also, when you look at Texas and the percentage of medical debt that people are carrying in Texas, it's crazy. The numbers are astronomical. And so basically, if you have a credit score in the state of Texas, you've got some kind of medical debt. I mean, that's where we're at in Texas. And so, you know, these things, they don't just happen in a vacuum, right? So I think having that component of health literacy, whether it's a requirement by insurance companies, by healthcare providers, by places that our kids are going to higher education locations, I think it's going to really, we're going to see a really impactful change in our societies. You know, people are going to be able to participate more and not carry so much debt. And so
Yeah.
that's how that came about. The reason it didn't move actually is because my very good friend and colleague on the other side of the aisle actually took that bill, and I joint authored their bill. And so we actually worked together to make sure that that bill got to the Senate. But everything that gets over to the Senate, you know, that's the land of the lost over there. So I
So I've
can't
heard.
vouch for anything coming back.
Sure.
And so, but it was a really great opportunity to work with, once again, my Republican colleagues to make sure that we're making our state healthier.
Yeah. Well, so you brought up the women's health and reproduction, and I think you're referring to the abortion laws in Texas. And I think that comes up obviously a lot recently, given the state of the politics nationally with the presidential election. Texas gets brought up quite a bit. Um, and I'm wondering, I guess the upcoming legislature, the 89th legislature, starts in January, I believe. I'm wondering if you think that it'll broaden sort of what's allowed in Texas. There's been so many, the Texas medical boards had to weigh in. There's been lawsuits. There's been AG. There's been all sorts of stuff. And I'm wondering if you have had conversations, if you've heard people talk about sort of where that might go, if anywhere, in the next legislation, in the next legislature.
Honestly, I do not think that we're going to see any changes.
Okay.
And this is not something that I say lightly, but at the end of the day, we just got to, accept where we are in this
Sure.
state. And we're not having conversations about rape and incest. We're not having conversation about women leaving the state. We're not having conversations about why maternal mortality has increased in our state. Well, why infant mortality now is on the rise after we've spent the last 15 years trying to make that number go down. We're seeing, almost 10, I think it's like a 10% increase in infant mortality, right? These are silent births. These are babies that are, not going to make it. And so it's a very cruel environment that women are living under. And the conversations are not how do we make it less cruel. We saw that with the Supreme Court. We see that with the AG. The conversations are actually about how to make it more restrictive, how to restrict transportation, like literally how to prevent women from moving across the state. This is crazy stuff that we're talking about. We're talking about restricting contraception. We're talking about in vitro fertilization. For everything my Republican colleagues have been saying about they're not coming for in vitro, the governor of this state has said it's something that we need to look at. And that's very concerning. The system in Texas works just fine for IVF. We have a golden standard there. I mean, could things be more affordable? Yes. Could things become less burdensome for families around how to navigate the insurance process, especially if you're a cancer survivor or somebody that's having some kind of treatment that might affect your sperm or your eggs, right? Yeah. But that's not what they're talking about when they want to talk about in vitro fertilization. What they're talking about is limiting how many eggs, can become embryos, how those embryos are stored, what happens with those embryos after they're created. This is crazy stuff. This is not turning to modern technology. This is turning to, I don't know, vibes, I guess. I have no idea. And so, for me, these are the things that at the end of the day, I've told my staff, and what I've been telling my constituents is, I don't see a bill coming to the floor that's going to create exemptions for children who are raped, or women who have complications with their pregnancies. I don't think that the Kate Cox story or the other stories that we've heard are going to be the last ones. I think that there are going to be more. But what we need to do now is triage. We need to make sure we're protecting IVF and other alternative reproductive technologies like surrogacy, right? That we need to make sure that adoption is still available for any family who, wants to be able to start their family or grow their family. We're in serious times. They're talking about no fault divorce.
Yep.
So these are things that we've
Yeah.
seen in Project 2025. These are the things that we've seen at both the state Republican National Convention, at the state Republican Convention, the National Republican Convention. We've seen the Southern Baptists come out and say, hey, we don't like IVF. And so I think there needs to be more conversations around these things, because I think that the majority of people, whether you're a Republican or a Southern Baptist or whatever, they know someone who's had problems with infertility.
Yeah.
They know someone who's had, an IVF cousin or nephew or niece or grandbaby, right? And
Sure.
so
Hopefully they don't
I
say
think
that
that
about them. Hopefully they don't call them my IVF cousin to their face. I don't know. Maybe they
well, I did see I do have a friend who has grandchildren who were conceived through IVF. Both of the embryos were frozen at the same time, but one child was born first. A couple of years passed. The second child was born, and this grandparent laughs all the time. He says, "Y'all are actually the same age."
I mean, that is
you
sort of
know,
an interesting conundrum, an interesting way to look at it. I don't know.
yeah, so I mean, I hear these stories all the time, and I think that's why these issues, they kind of transcend party lines, and they're more about principles, and they're more about, good practice. And so that's kind of the things that I focus on. We see that our business community wants women to have access to reproductive health care. They want our business community is fighting for expansion of healthcare. We see our schools are also on board with these things. And so this is just good policy. This is really not about being partisan in any way.
Yeah. You brought up sort of the protecting sort of what's there already, whether it be IVF or other alternative, surrogacy, adoption, stuff like that. I don't really know much about the surrogacy or the adoption. I've never gone through that. I don't think I was adopted, or, whatever. I don't think I was, but I don't think I was. So is that something that, is the adoption process? I've heard that it's really challenging and sort of there's a lot of hurdles to jump through, and that makes sense. You're taking the life of a child into your home. You probably want some barriers to entry. Is there appetite for something like that to, I don't know, make it more accessible to more people?
I do think I've seen on both sides of the aisle people bring this issue up, and so I do think that there is room there to make the adoption process at least more affordable, and make it more accessible to different to more families. And so I do hear that conversation, but then when the bills come on the floor, things just get caught up in just petty fights. And so it's really doing a disservice to Texas families. We need to make sure that we're there, that we're helping families get access to resources, and that we're creating a trauma-informed foster care system,
Yeah.
right, for kids. And that while they're in the system, while they're under the custody of the state, that we're treating them with respect. They're getting a good education. They're healthy. they're eating, and that we're setting them up for success. 5 million children in the state of Texas go through our public schools. We're educating not only the workforce of our future, but really the nation and the world's future. And so we have a really big responsibility to them.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought up education because it's another thing that you focus on quite a bit. And you talk about reforming recapture. I think that is it Plano ISD is I think the third what is it? I don't know how to it's always sort of convoluted how to explain this. They send the third most amounts to back to the state through recapture. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're up there, and I actually have three ISDs in my district. I have Frisco ISD and Allen ISD as well,
Yeah.
and all three of my districts are recaptured districts. What this essentially means is that since I was a little girl sitting in Brinker Elementary in Plano ISD, my school district, just Plano ISD, has sent over $1 billion back to the state of Texas, right? And that's a lot of money, right? That's a ton of money. And so when you're talking about these school districts that are putting money back to the state, there's a reason for it. It's because over those 40 years or 30 years since I've been that little girl in that classroom, the state of Texas has been putting in less money, and they've been asking more of property taxpayers to put in that money, especially property taxpayers in what they're considering high wealth areas or high
Yeah.
property tax, high property value areas. And so that's not necessarily a problem for Plano ISD or Frisco or Allen ISD, the districts that are starting to grow, right? Because of population increase, because of people moving, out of Dallas or Fort Worth or whatever, and they're moving up, buying bigger houses or whatever. That's not the issue. The issue is that there isn't much, transparency around that taxation process. So what was supposed to be going and helping school districts, maybe in Houston ISD or San Antonio ISD, school districts that need it. You have school districts like Dallas, who's also a district that needs it, not in my district, but right south of me, who also pays into recapture,
Yeah.
right? And that's because the state of Texas, like I said, is putting in less money. And it's also because the money the state of Texas isn't keeping up with inflation. It's not indexed to anything. It's not indexed to CPI or anything. So the amount of money that was put in 2019, for instance, didn't hold for perpetuity to 2024. So what we're asking for is transparency around where that money is going. Is that money going back into education? Is it going into general revenue? Is it going into the rainy day fund? Is it going to the border? Where is that money going?
Yeah. Sure. That would be great to know. Absolutely. I mean, I grew up and I live in Austin, and AISD blows everyone out of the water with how much money they send back to the state and recapture. It's a lot. I'll keep my personal opinion to myself, but it's a lot of money. And I hear constantly about AISD. They struggle with different things here that, and I don't know if they would use that money if they had all that money and kept it or whatever. Would all of their students get straight A's and go on to Harvard? I don't know, but it kind of seems like there's something going on there that maybe some reform. I don't. It should it be scrapped and replaced with something? Should it be reformed? I don't know.
Well, I don't know if we can totally scrap it and replace. I mean, I don't think we could totally scrap it. And that's not necessarily what I'm advocating for. I
Sure.
know that there's other districts who are going through their recapture. I would say, their steps, their program, right? Because there's certain things that districts do as they become bigger recapture districts. They convert, copper pennies to to golden pennies, and there's all these initiatives that go before the voters, right? Before you get to a position where you're Austin ISD or your Plano ISD, right?
Yeah.
Some of the larger payers into it. But what we're seeing is that now Frisco is becoming a payer into recapture. Allen is becoming a payer into recapture. And so we need to create systems where they don't experience the shock that, for instance, Plano has experienced in the last 30 years. And so that we're creating systems that are sustainable. That's really what we need to kind of focus on as we're talking about things like vouchers, right? Talking about expanding charters or homeschooling or some of these other programs in our state. Uh, the recapture needs to be part of that conversation,
Yeah.
right? And I think that once again, that's not a partisan issue. I've had multiple colleagues on the other side of the aisle come and say, "Hey, I see you filed, these 5 recapture bills. They're very interesting. Can we talk about them?"
Yeah.
Because there aren't very many lawmakers that are willing to come and start talking about recapture reform. Um, it's not, it's not one of those issues that people are like, yeah, recapture, but it's a very, very important issue because
Yeah.
it's it's a large chunk of your property taxes if you live in a place like Plano or Austin or Dallas.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I've always sort of wondered what would happen to recapture if we did go to a full voucher system. I don't do I continue to pay taxes to AISD, or why even have them as a pass through? Why am I paying directly to the state? I don't know, but I'm sure they'll figure that out. Maybe.
Yeah, I have a lot of those questions myself. But honestly, before we get to those questions, we need to just make sure that we're not even allowing a bill like that to get on the House floor because these voucher scams, we've seen what they do to other states. I mean, look at Arizona, right? Our neighbor state of Arizona. It's shocking how they've blown up their budget. It's disappointing to know that there's only 2 Romanian American lawmakers in the whole nation, and the other one is in Arizona. It's my very good friend, Speaker Ben Toma, and I hate to throw him under the bus on this one, but this was his bill, so I am curious how he's explaining blowing up their budget on welfare for the wealthy and
Well,
coupons for
it does seem, and I don't know. Anything could happen. We've heard about school choice or vouchers or ESAs or whatever you want to call it, whatever vernacular it is. It doesn't matter. But we've heard some version of it for a long time now, and it seems like the 89th ledge that there's a good chance that something might happen. I don't know what that looks like. Only time will tell, of course. If it does pass, it sounds like you're against it. Is there some sort of middle ground that you would like to see in that scenario? Is it the reform of the recapture? Is it transparency? Is it more money to public? I don't know. And I'm just curious, like, how would that negotiation work for you? Is there something that is there a middle ground that you would be, all right, at least I got this?
Well, I'm a kid that grew up around times where I was told things like you don't negotiate with people that aren't coming to the table in good faith,
Okay.
right? And I don't think that these vouchers, I don't think that people that are proponents of these vouchers are really coming to the table in good faith. You know, if they were, then the conversation wouldn't be do this or we're not doing this,
Yeah.
right? They should work in tandem together. We should be talking. I mean, it's in our Constitution as Texans, when we rose, when we raise our hand to take an oath, it does say that we will fully fund public education. It
Yeah.
does say that. So it doesn't say anything about homeschooling or vouchers or private schools or religious institutions. It doesn't say anything like that. And so I don't feel like the conversation ever was in good faith, because it kind of just felt like other things are being held hostage, specifically an increase in funding to the basic allotment. And
Yeah.
so I don't think that vouchers are good for Texas. I think that we've seen in every other state for the majority of it where they've passed some kind of voucher, whether it's been for a small number of students or a specific type of product within these books or whatever, they limited it. It's always, we haven't seen these phenomenal results that we're supposed to get with vouchers. Like, it doesn't spike their test scores by 20%, right? So it's a very big risk for very, 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 very small minimum, almost not there. You really got to find those statistics that prove that they work. But anybody can find a talking point for anything they want these days.
Sure.
So it's just a very big risk, and so I just don't see that happening. I also don't see them changing the recapture system at all. That was never part of the conversations. We had 5 special sessions on vouchers. Never once did they talk about the recapture system. So I don't see that being another issue. We in Texas have a lot of unfunded mandates that we're putting on our schools right now. There's about $5 billion just sitting there that was supposed to be spent on our public educations, and so I would like to see them come and talk about that.
Yeah.
And talk about the fact that these are the plans to get third graders to read on level, right? Those are the conversations we should have. School choice, there, first of all, 2 things I want to say about this. One, in my district, my constituents have a choice as to where they want to send their kids. We have private schools, we have public schools, we have charter schools, we have, you can send your kid homeschooling options. That there are many options. So that's already there. Second of all, the idea that it's school choice, it's school's choice. All those options that I've said, with the exception of homeschools, it's the school, private school, the school is accepting the kid. They have to go through an admissions process. If the school isn't choosing that child, doesn't matter if they got a $10 million voucher. You
Yeah.
can't use it, right? These charter schools, all these things, it's the schools that are choosing those children. So that's why it's really, really important that we continue to fight for robust public education, because my families, yeah, I might have some families that are moving into my district because their kid got accepted to a private school, but the majority of families that are moving into my district are moving here because we have A+ rated schools,
Yeah.
public schools.
Sure. Yeah, and there's a lot of that in my area as well. So I want to be respectful of your time, and I'm curious, with the 89th legislature coming up in January. There's a lot of interim developments, a lot of interim hearings that have been happening. I think some of them have to. I know that I think that you filed a bill about compassionate use, increasing the number of licenses for that. I think it's currently at 3, and you maybe filed a bill to increase it to 6. Is that correct?
Yes, I
Yes.
did.
So, and I know
Yeah,
that they've been talking about that in the interim somewhat, or maybe tangentially. I don't know. And I'm wondering, sort of, what are your priorities? Is that something you're going to focus on again, the compassionate use program? Are there other priorities that you want to focus on in the next legislature?
yeah, I am going to look at, I always am looking at the compassionate use program, just because I think, Texas being the agricultural state that we are, we should be doing better around, especially if we're going to talk about access to healthcare and things like that. We should be doing better around our compassionate use program and access to medical cannabis in our state. Um, for me, I've always kind of gone to where the need has been around this issue. And, I know that there are more and more people that are getting their access to cannabis in the state. And so I know that there is a need for more places,
Yeah.
more licensed places. Now, I'm very impressed on the places that I've been to see how wide their reach is around getting access, getting resources to people, and making sure people have access. But not only do I think that we need to have a more robust program, um, I also believe that the program needs to be more realistic when we're talking about cannabis use in Texas.
Yeah.
And, we've just been very, very restrictive. We have a very limited cannabis program. We don't have very much access to THC. I try to explain to people that cannabis use is kind of like, you kind of need a more holistic approach to cannabis use. You can't be really messing with it, taking things out, especially because the variety of needs that people have is getting larger now. Last session, we expanded cannabis use to chronic pain,
Yeah.
right? so as we're expanding kind of who can have access to the system, I think two things need to happen. One, the program needs to become more accessible throughout the state of Texas. So if you live in the Panhandle, you have just as much access as if you live in Austin,
Yeah.
right? That needs to, we have to have equity there. But also, if we're going to expand who can be like chronic pain and cancer and PTSD and all these things, then we need to make sure that the product that we're providing can actually treat those things. And that I think we can work on. We can work on what we've seen in other states, even Oklahoma, right north of us. I would never want to promote Oklahoma, but on
There's a
this
Red River
issue,
rivalry or something I've heard, right?
but on this issue, they seem to have been able to get this right, and we're still working on it. And so obviously I would like to be able to speak on this issue and try to tell people that cannabis use is more than just being charged for a crime, right?
Yeah.
Or the criminal component of it. It's if we're going to have access to this plant in our state, that it's something that works, that it's safe to consume, and that people have access to it, and then it's not expensive.
Yeah, for sure. Was there anything else in the upcoming legislature that you might be focusing on?
Well, I think for
We've
me,
covered so much that it's okay if they answer it. I don't know.
yeah, well, I was just gonna go back to healthcare.
Yeah,
For me, it's really gonna be healthcare next session. Healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. I know everyone's going to be talking about vouchers and public education. I know my colleagues we're gonna be up for the fight. I personally don't think vouchers are gonna pass.
sure.
I think, save this clip, and in May of 2025, we can play it back and I can be like, told you. I
Well,
just don't.
hold on. It might be December 2025 if there's special session.
Oh gosh, no. I think, look, I don't think it's gonna pass. I think that, for what I've seen, the arguments around this issue is not popular in the state of Texas. Um, the Republican Party of Texas is not united on this issue. I think that we see that people love their public schools. People love their Friday night lights. So I think that yes, it's going to be the fight of our lives, but I think we're going to win. What I think that not a lot of people are talking about, the thing that I think that Texas should definitely be focused on next session, we cannot wait, is mental health. Making sure our kids have access to mental health resources, making sure that people who are victims of violent crimes, mass shooting crimes, violent crimes, these things that we're seeing in our communities, have access to rehabilitation, to mental health care. Make sure mothers who are dealing with trauma from pregnancy have access to mental health. For me, it's definitely going to be mental health and healthcare related, because Texas, we got to do better. We have to do better.
Well, Representative Plesa, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. Please keep us informed of what you're doing in the next legislature. It would be great to hear from you. Is there social media or website that you want to plug?
Absolutely. Please follow me. I'm on like all the platforms: Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. It's at Plesa, Plesa, for Texas. Everything is spelled out. Or you can reach us on our website. You can just literally leave a message on the website, Plesa4Texas.com. And looking forward to seeing you guys on the campaign trail and winning in November.
Well, Representative Plesa, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.